would you choose your life again?
Why would somebody want to be a Jewish infant under the Nazis, nearly starved to death? I never said this before, but I once stabbed out of sheer aggression. It's that love that I think helped to transmute that pain into some kind of wisdom.
You said, I wake up thinking of Gaza and I go to sleep with it.
If anybody thinks that Palestinian-Israeli history began on October the 7th, they should look at that study in 2004. A lot of the Palestinian kids were already deeply traumatized. And this has been going on for 80 years now.
Are you a good father?
I was not the father that I knew I could have been.
If your passing is a peaceful one, your kids and your wife, they're all around you. What should they hear from Gabor before you go? Okay. Hi, everyone. So I finally sit with Dr. Gabor. It was, I would say, an assignment to balance what we usually do, showing the human behind the title, at the same time, take from his knowledge to share with all of you. I hope I did a decent job.
You did terrible.
Yeah, I thought so.
Actually, I really enjoyed it. Your questions were often deep, and the way you listen, you weren't just listening for me to finish and then you ask your next question. You're actually taking in what I was saying and you're responding to it. So it was much more in the nature of a conversation than just a straightforward interview. I really appreciated that.
Same.
And also, you really seemed to get what I was saying.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, it seemed that way to me. So I really enjoyed it.
I'm very bad at faking, so it's definitely I was getting it.
Okay, good.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this interview or conversation, as Gabor mentioned. Always support us, follow, subscribe, and of course, if you follow, support more. And if you don't know Dr. Gabor, find him everywhere, stalk him, support him, and spread the knowledge to help more people. Enjoy. Okay. Hi, doctor.
Hello. By the way, the name is Gabor.
You prefer doctor or Gabor?
Gabor.
Gabor it is. So I've seen a lot of your content, and what made me feel a certain way that I want to get to know you, because all I hear is this great, rich information that you teach all of us, whether it's trauma and childhood and all of that. But I said, you know what? For me, the slogan of ABtalks, our show, is to discover the human behind the title. So I want to get to know you today as much as I can. So my questions, you'll see it's all about.
Good luck with that.
I'll try. So my first question is a very simple question.
Yeah.
How are you really doing?
You know, if you had asked me that 3 weeks ago, I would have said I'm having a difficult time. If you asked me today, I'm feeling very well and a lot of peace inside. And peace, I think, is what we're all looking for. So how am I doing? I'm doing very well, thank you.
And why 3 weeks ago it was troubling?
Because some old psychological stuff, emotional stuff that clearly I haven't worked out yet came up for me. And the human mind is amazing. You can go from heaven to hell like that. And I put myself into a very difficult place. But it's been a good learning experience too. So again, if you ask me, these days I'm very well, knock on wood, but it's ongoing work.
And if I ask you, who are you, Gabor?
Well, you see, That's always a better question than an answer. Because if I gave you the usual stuff, that I'm an 81-year-old retired medical doctor, an author, that's not who I am. That's just what I've done. As to who we are, I think that's an ongoing question. So I don't think there's a satisfactory answer to that the mind can give you, because the mind doesn't know who we are. And some people with deep spiritual experiences, whether in Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Sufi or Hindu or tradition, they might have a deep experience of who they are, which is always beyond the personality. It's always beyond the limitations of the body and the mind. But I'm not somebody who could give you an answer to that.
So it's an ongoing experience.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important question that we should all be asking ourselves: is who we are, because who we think we are determines how we react to the world.
So would we safely say, like, this is something that was playing in my mind a few months ago, the idea of self-image.
Yeah.
And how we paint our own self-image. So if you think you're an impulsive person, you're drawing a painting that you're an impulsive person, and you probably play the confirmation bias of always proving that you're an impulsive person. But if you edit your self-image and you say, I'm becoming less of an impulsive person day by day, you probably in 1 year become less impulsive than, so you just edited your self-image.
I wish it was that simple. First of all, an image is only an image. It's not the reality. And we live in a world that's very much based on images. I mean, the whole social media, everybody's trying to create an image. But that's not the real person. That's the image. And that's the first point. The second point is an image is very often based on what you think other people want to see. So that the more we are concerned with our image, the less we're being ourselves. And we see that all the time in this culture, but in every culture. Impulse, when you said impulsive person, impulse regulation, like no baby is born with impulse regulation. They can't even control their bladder. They can't control any aspect of their behavior. They just react to the environment. So impulse regulation has to develop. And there's certain circuits in the brain, particularly right here, whose job it is to regulate impulses, which means when an impulse arises, this part of the brain will say, okay, you might want to do that, but is it a good idea? Should you be acting it out? Impulse regulation has to develop, but for it to develop, you need the right environment. In the wrong environment, a lot of people grow up with no impulse regulation. And you see it all over the place. And I've had that problem significantly. So just to tell myself that I won't be impulsive is not going to change it. I have to deal with the underlying issues that make me impulsive. So just painting a different image is not going to change it, not when it matters. So I think it needs to go deeper than changing one's image. It's a matter of changing one's relationship to oneself, which is a much more complicated, complex challenge.
Okay, then I go back to you. Gabor's childhood in 3 words.
Well, I'll tell you. There was a study done, I've talked about this before. There was a study done in Gaza in 2004. A large percentage of the kids wet their beds. I wet my bed till I was 13. That wetting the bed is a trauma response. So I had deep trauma. If anybody thinks that Palestinian-Israeli history began on October the 7th, they should look at that study in 2004. A lot of the Palestinian kids were already deeply traumatized 21 years ago.
Mm.
So was I as an infant, as a Jewish infant under the Nazis. So my infancy was really difficult, terrible actually, and I nearly died. My childhood, I came from quite a stable family. So I would say that my parents, they were not perfect, and they had their own issues, but a fairly stable, secure, and loving environment.
Mm.
But I was carrying so much stuff from my first year and a half or so, that my mother took me to to a psychologist when I was 8 or 9 years old because of the bedwetting. And the psychologist said, well, madam, based on what happened to this kid when he was a baby, you're lucky if the only problem he has is bedwetting. So I was a very conscientious kid. I was a good student, as long as my mother put the pressure on me to study. I enjoyed reading a lot. I had friends. I played. But also I had deep anxieties inside. So that was my childhood.
Your mother took you to a psychologist at a very young age, and so at that phase, she was aware enough to think, I need to go to a psychologist?
Well, I was wetting my bed.
But I would assume a lot of families wouldn't even take that as an option.
Well, it's not normal. It's not average at age 8 to still be wetting your bed. You know, so that's something that there had to be a reason for it. You know, of course, trauma is one reason. When that self-regulation of the nervous system doesn't develop under the right conditions, so that's why she took me.
You mentioned also the Gaza children, and you mentioned your childhood, and you mentioned how a child wetting their bed is a response to a trauma.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that connection?
Sure. I mentioned earlier that no baby is born with impulse control. No baby is also born with bladder control. For that kind of regulation of the body to happen, the nervous system has to develop so that it can regulate the bladder. It can regulate your impulses. It can, and so on. Now, it has to develop. Now, whenever you talk about development, like, for example, if you're growing a garden, developing plants, what would you have to pay attention to? I'm asking you.
Soil, irrigation.
Sunlight.
Sunlight, yeah.
Exactly. In other words, the conditions. In other words, for proper development, you need the right conditions. Same with the nervous system and the brain and the personality. When the conditions are stressed or traumatizing or unstable, the nervous system does not develop the way it should. Just like a plant wouldn't develop if you didn't give it the proper irrigation. So that's how trauma affects development.
Okay. What is a very, very nice memory from your childhood?
We lived in Budapest, Hungary, going for hikes in the hills outside in Buda and on the other side of the Danube. That's a nice memory. Certain family holidays or holy days and family meals, playing with my friends.
And what is a very difficult memory from your childhood?
I never said this before, but I once stabbed my seat in class. We're sitting in seats beside each other. I stabbed my seatmate with a knife, but not a knife, sorry, with a pen, out of sheer aggression. I had no idea where it came from. That's a difficult memory. being in school and being teased or bullied for being Jewish. That's a difficult memory.
Mm. Why, doctor, sorry, Gabor,
Sure.
why do negative things, messages, words stick way more than the positive? Is it just because of survival mechanism of ourself, or how does it register way more? It's like when you read 100 positive comments and then the negative one.
Mm-hmm.
It sticks.
Well, we depend on other people. I mean, by nature, we're communal, social creatures.
Mm.
We would not have evolved as a species without being interconnected with other people. So our relationships with other people are essential for our survival and our development.
Mm.
And so anything that threatens that, you will pay attention to.
Mm.
So when people attack you or they shame you, you're going to remember that because it's deeply painful.
Mm.
Or when you've done something that threatens your relationship, like stabbing my friend, you're going to remember that.
Mm.
So I think it's because of this interconnection, and it is survival.
Mm. Gabor, why do you do all that you do at your age and your phase in this life? You probably don't need to do any of this, but you're doing it. You take the time. You do interviews. You do books. You talk about a lot of important things that will help a lot of people, hopefully, and you know this firsthand. So, what's the why behind all of this and the purpose?
There are two aspects there.
Mm.
One is entirely positive, and the other is not.
Mm.
The positive is that I've learned a few things in this life, and I've been fortunate. I mean, I've been able to learn some very important things, and I believe in what I've learned. I believe in the insights or understandings that I've been able to develop about health, about human beings, about human nature, about childhood, about trauma, about the mind. And I consider these truths to be important. And I love sharing them. I just love talking about what matters to me. And that's totally positive. And not that everybody agrees with me, and not that everybody likes me, but a lot of people really seem to get a lot of benefit from it. And they react to it very positively. And I think that's great. So that's the positive part. The negative part is where I do too much of it, where I stress myself, or I don't take enough time for self-care, or I don't pay enough attention to my relationship with my wife. I'm busy being the big guy out there, but then I come home and I'm all stressed and tired, and so right now it's really a matter of creating that balance, or actually living that balance. And that second part comes from the early trauma of having to prove that I matter, because the first message I got from the world is that you don't matter. And when you get that message, then you spend the rest of your life proving that you're important. And so that looking for attention or approval, or even just to be important, that becomes a kind of a negative motivation. So the first is pure. That's my calling. We're speaking here in Los Angeles. Here in LA, I took part in a workshop 8 years ago. The intention was to find your calling. What's your calling? What is it that calls you? And what is it that when you left the world, you wanted? What's the imprint that you wanted to leave behind? And what came to me is that my calling is that people are free. And that's a real calling of mine. Freedom really matters to me. And when I say freedom, I mean that in a political sense, whether it's the struggle of the Palestinians to be free of occupation, or in the individual sense that people should be free of all their early programming and traumas and stresses. So that's a calling. And it turns me on, it excites me. So that's why I do it. So that's the good part. The thing is to separate the calling from the compulsion.
How are you doing with that?
Well, these days I'm doing very well with it. Thank you. I mean, when I say these days, I mean in the last 2 days. No, I mean recently. Okay. You know, I'm doing very well with it, and it's made a big difference. And it's one of the reasons when you ask me how am I doing, how am I, that peace that I'm experiencing right now is precisely because I've been working on making that distinction and not being driven by that need, but just following my calling.
I heard you say that you've gone through depression.
Yeah.
Have you ever had suicidal thoughts on those dark moments?
Yes. Not in the sense of actual plans, but fantasies of what would happen if I slit my wrists, you know, and just life is not worth I've had those thoughts that life is not worth living. So I've never been suicidal in the sense of I'm going to do something to myself. But I've had fantasies of it.
And Gabor, how did you get out of those dark phases, or is it something that haunts you from time to time?
It can still come up sometimes. But I recognize it now for what it is. That, because when you're suicidal, you're just trying to escape. That's all. Even that part of you that says life is not worth living, it just wants you to be escaping from the suffering. There's not an enemy. You know, it's all it knows. Why? Because it believes that you're stuck and you're helpless and it'll never change. No, that's the state of a traumatized child, of an infant or young child who feels there's no help, this will last forever, and it'll never change. So no one knows, when that state arises, I just recognize it. This is a memory. It's a kind of a emotional memory. It's not reality, because you're not helpless, and you know that things change. But so when it arises, I just see it for an imprint of very old trauma.
And that helps you exit?
Well, as soon as I see it, I'm no longer in it.
One of the nice quotes I heard a few years ago, it was Tom Hanks in a group discussion. And he said, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. And I try to apply it to the good times and the bad times.
Yeah.
That a good time is going to wither away, so don't be depressed after.
Yeah.
And a bad time, it's temporary. Or hopefully it is. It's just you have to sift through all of this, and the clouds should clear up, and then they'll come back, and then they clear up again.
It's really important to realize that we go through these cycles. And and from the Buddhist point of view, you know, that's why they don't want you, they advise you not to get attached to any one particular state. Because if you get attached to the good times, you're going to suffer big time when the good times end. If you get attached to the bad times, you just feel depressed and melancholy and hopeless. So just to let it come and go like the weather. You know, the winds are gonna come, the winds are gonna go. The rains are gonna come, rain's gonna go. That's an important piece of wisdom. Tom Hanks, bless his soul, was not the original person to say that. I'm not sure if it doesn't come from the Bible, perhaps.
I don't know.
But it's an ancient saying, this too shall pass,
Yeah, he was quoting something.
Yeah.
There's another nice saying I heard recently, and it was a kid. They was like asking kids in the street,
Oh yeah,
and one of the kids said, "You can't control the winds, but you can control the sail."
yeah.
And I really like that.
Well, that's a wonderful way to put it.
Hmm. Life can throw shit at you from every angle, and then what do you do with that?
Well, that's where the freedom comes in. So that the less a person is under the impact of the past, the more they can be in the present. Then they can respond to the present according to what the present demands. So if you need to shift your sails because the wind has shifted, then you will. Trouble is a lot of people under the influence of trauma and under the influence of culture are kind of programmed. And with that programming, they're not free to adjust the sails. They're just blown by the wind.
What does love mean to you?
Well, when you first mentioned that word, immediately the picture of the face of my wife came up. So that's been a big, that relationship has been not the source of love, because I actually think the source of love is universal, but it's been a channel through which it's mostly reached me. Not the only one, but that's what came up. What does it mean to me? It means a deep sense that we belong here, that this world is here to hold us and to support us, and it's totally reciprocal. We receive it and we give it, but it's not a quantity that you dish out like, here's some ice cream for you. It's really, sometimes I'm not sure if I'm saying what I know or what I think I know. But sitting where I'm sitting right now, if you ask me, it's actually in the nature of the universe. Love is, belonging and support. And I'm saying this despite all the horrible things that are going on right now. I mean, right now there's a genocide going on in the Middle East, and the whole world is watching it and doing, let's say, and the governments and the media, and they're doing nothing about it. So how can I speak about love? Underneath it, I think it's there. And it's actually a failure of love, or how should I put this? The people who behave that way, they've been cut off from love, which means they've been cut off from their true nature.
And that's what makes them commit all these ugly things.
Yeah. They like if you take somebody like Hitler, a badly abused, traumatized child with a terrible self-image. So he has to become their Führer. He has to become the leader. And people have to salute him for him to feel okay about himself. He wasn't born like that. And he's full of hatred because that's what he experienced. So I think people have behaved that way. Now, that's not the only reason. There's also world politics and economics and the struggle for control and all that. But on a psychological level, which is not the only level that we have to consider, but on that level, it is all about trying to make the ego bigger because you feel so poorly inside. And I've been that way.
What do your kids mean to you?
My kids?
Hmm.
Well, love is the word that comes up. They're wonderful people. They're wonderful people who did not have the childhood I wish I could have given them because of my own limitations and unresolved stuff, but who each in their way have blossomed and have shown incredible creativity and talent and resilience, and who are still struggling with some things. But mostly they just mean it's like we're in this nest together, and actually we will be soon, because I think I mentioned I'll be a grandfather in a few weeks, and all my 3 kids live in New York, so we'll be like together, the 5 of us, for the first time for a long time.
Nice.
Yeah.
And congrats.
Thanks. Yeah.
Are you a good father?
I am now. But it's taken a lot of learning and unlearning. By the way, the word good, I don't like it. It's a judgment. So if I said I'm a bad father, I'm judging myself. If I'm a good father, I'm still judging myself. If you ask me, was I the father that I wish I could have been, had I known more, had I been more mature? No, I wasn't. But I wasn't bad. Am I the father now who can see his kids for who they are and meet them where they're at, rather than projecting my own expectations and disappointments or hopes or pride on them, but letting them be who they are and enjoying being with who they are? Yes, much more than I've ever been. But it's taken a while.
You're right about the word good. It's a lazy sticker.
Yeah.
For a complex situation.
Well, you know what it is? It's a kind of a childish way of thinking. Because a kid will think this is good, this is bad, but it's always much more complex.
Yeah, humans, we like to simplify things, was the movie good?
Yeah.
And you're like, if you're really specific, you can say the lighting was great, but the sound and the some scenes were wow, and some scenes were, that's the accurate answer.
Or you might ask, did you enjoy the movie? Which is a very personal response. 2 people can see the same film, and someone say, this is terrible, the other one, this is fantastic. What they're really saying is, it spoke to me, I enjoyed it, it made me feel good, or it taught me things, or it entertained me. The other person will say, my response was negative, it made me feel bad, it bored me, it didn't grab my attention, and so on,
Yeah, perception.
Yeah, it's perception.
And this, that was, I'd love to hear you boomerang or bounce off this idea with you. This last few weeks, I've been really thinking about the word I mentioned, self-image, right? And I was thinking, Gabor, that our own perception of ourselves is very inaccurate.
Yes.
So I was telling this to a few friends, whoever I can be a bit of philosophical with. And I was saying, the way you see yourself is not accurate. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, I'll prove it to you.
Yeah.
So if you look at a picture of 20 years ago or 10 years ago, what you were wearing at a certain party, a lot of the time you're like, what was I wearing? Or how was I so confident with this hairdo or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same human, but your perception 10 years ago of how you looked at that moment was, I'm the shit. You look back now with the current software of your brain and you don't like.
Yeah.
So it's quite inaccurate.
But it's not the same human. I'm not the same person as I was. A lot of my features are the same, characteristics, but I'm not exactly the same as I was 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago. I don't know if you know the Scottish poet Robert Burns. Okay, so he was a great 18th century poet of Scotland. He's like the Scottish national poet.
Mm.
And in one of his poems, he says, would that God the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us. In other words, if we could only see ourselves as our self-image is always very different than the way other people see us. And I think it'd be very helpful to all of us if we knew how others saw us. Not that we should necessarily try to have people approve of us and so on, but at least to know there's so many people in power. If only they knew how people see them, you know.
So this quote, Gabor, is actually in my phone. I saved it because my therapist taught it to me.
Okay, great.
It's a very nice quote, but I just didn't know the name of the man you mentioned.
Yeah.
And this is where I was going with the point about that if your image of yourself, you assume when you look at the mirror that that's how people see you, it's subjective. It's not very accurate.
Yeah.
So I think, Gabor, a wise human is open to listening to people they trust that are varied. So if 10 people say, Gabor, man, the way you speak is so fluid, is so interesting, I'm never bored. Even if your own perception of yourself, you're like, man, I speak okay, I'm not that, I'm boring. Maybe you are interesting. And maybe if you just listen to how people are responding to you, you might think, you know what? Maybe I'm actually better than what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why a lot of plastic surgery happens. The woman looking at herself thinks she's not that pretty, although maybe 10 people around her or 100 or 100,000 are like, you're gorgeous.
Exactly.
Don't touch your face.
Yeah.
Then she still goes and does surgery.
Yeah.
So that's the topic I've been
thinking
about.
Yeah. What did you say just before you mentioned the plastic surgery? What was that?
I mentioned, I said the plastic
No, how people boring or interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's what's interesting. Every once in a while, I confess this. I'll go on YouTube and I look at one of my podcasts, and there's a million out there, you know, and people say, oh, I could listen to him for hours. I could listen to him for days. I get a lot of that. And then every once in a while, somebody will say, he bores me to death. I can't listen to him for more than 5 minutes. I go to sleep. Now, that's really interesting because objectively, they're looking at the same thing. So it all depends on the state of their nervous systems. And some people find the way I speak calming and soothing and engaging. And other people who probably need more stimulation, I don't give it to them. But it's got nothing to do with what I'm doing. Whether somebody finds me this way or that way, it's got to do with their nervous system and their perception. So they're each looking at me through a different lens. I'm just doing what I'm doing. And the same thing is true for everybody, by the way. The other thing about mirrors is that for a mirror to reflect what you actually look like, that mirror has to be clear and clean. If the mirror is all smudgy and messed up, it's going to reflect a totally distorted image. A lot of people have distorted images of themselves because our self-image develops based on what the world mirrors back to us when we were kids. So if our parents were stressed or depressed or anxious or worse, abusive or absent, what do we get mirrored back at us? Is negative image. And then we see ourselves that way. It can also be that we got so much negativity. You know, there's that phrase narcissism. So Narcissus, do you know the ancient myth of Narcissus? Okay, well, Narcissus is a character in Greek mythology who falls in love with his image. He looks into a stream. He's a beautiful creature. Everybody just was in love with him. Including the nymph Echo, who actually dies of love for Narcissus. But Narcissus looks in the stream and sees his image and he falls in love with his image, and he keeps trying to connect, but he can't. I think he ends up dying because he fell in love with his own image. So a narcissist is somebody who's in love with their own image, and they can't be real. And if they were hurt and traumatized, then sometimes they create a self-image to compensate for that. I have to be tough, I have to be, and everything, I can't look at my weaknesses because that's vulnerable. I can't admit any mistakes because then I'm not perfect. And that's a narcissist. And what other people, and the only thing that matters is what happens to me. Now, children go through a narcissistic phase. That's part of development. But if the conditions are right, they grow out of it.
And you know, Gabor, you mentioned a point that I find very actually a lot of points I find interesting, but one that I want to respond to. A child is one of those creatures that when we're born, everything revolves around you.
Exactly.
So the parents look at you, you cry, they attend to you in a normal house.
You're hungry, they feed you.
So I feel, like you said, it builds a narcissistic, self-centered creature.
Yeah.
You said something that I didn't hear before. You said in a natural circumstance, that narcissistic baby is supposed to grow out of the narcissism.
Yeah.
How does that is that empathy? How do then, as a normal child, go out?
At a certain point, the normal child will realize that mother is separate from me. That mother is another person. And we're in contact, but she's not the same as me. For that, the child has to feel comfortable and confident and secure inside. And then somebody calls this the theory of mind. Theory of mind is when you start to realize that other people have different thoughts, different experiences, different mental processes than you do. But for that, again, I go back to what I said about development. For that healthy development to take place, you have to receive a lot of understanding, a lot of security, a lot of empathy. When you do, you will naturally become empathetic. You will naturally understand that people have different experiences, different needs, and that how you see things is not necessarily how they see things, and you can respect those differences. That happens when the developmental conditions are safe, secure, attuned, and compassionate. In the absence of that, we get stuck.
And is it true that, on the word stuck, that some, or maybe all of us in a certain capacity or the other, if you were traumatized at a certain department of your growth, you get stunted and you get stuck there even though you're 50, but emotionally in that part, you're still like 6?
Emotionally, I'm 81 now. As I often said, when I was young and stupid at age 80, I was quite capable of being a 2-year-old emotionally, depending on what was triggering me. So I can be intellectually very mature, very adept, very insightful, and then you push a certain button, and all of a sudden, I become an infant. Or, have you ever said to a friend of yours, "Don't be such a baby"? That's exactly what you're saying. Because at that moment, they're behaving like a baby. Or when they say to somebody, "Grow up already," what are you saying? You're saying that at this moment, you're behaving like a toddler. It happens to all of us.
Mel Robbins told me that before our interview, she goes, "When I look at people, I just look at them as all emotionally 8-year-old." And it makes my life easier. And it's an interesting way that if you picture that, you're more empathetic and patient.
8-year-old, you said. That's lucky. Most people are not even 8 years old. When you push the buttons, they're toddlers.
Do I have the red card, Sally? Yeah. And the other box, you have it? Okay, nice. Let's see if we have it. A moment for that. Okay, Gabor. So these are more hypothetical questions and maybe some things you've mentioned that I would quote.
By the way, let me ask you something.
Of course.
How's the project of getting to know me going for you?
I'm enjoying it. How is it going for you?
I'm not asking if you're enjoying it. I'm asking, how's the project of getting to know me going?
Fairly good.
What's the hesitation?
Because I get excited and then I ask you about general topics that have nothing to do with you personally, but it's your knowledge. So I bounce between you personally and things that I think can benefit people.
So that's what I've been noticing,
Yeah.
which is okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm enjoying the conversation too. I just was curious about how your project was going.
I think it's good because it's personal and public. So
okay, good. Okay.
Okay, so if I asked you, Gabor, to imagine a white canvas,
yeah,
and I asked you, can you paint your current mental state? What would you paint?
You should ask my wife. She's a painter. I'm not. But what comes up is blue. And I paint a blue sky.
Okay.
Which is very peaceful and full of possibility. That's what I paint.
Okay. What are people always surprised to learn about you?
That I have a sense of humor. They think I'm this really serious, dour, but actually I'm laughing all the time.
Okay.
And playing all the time, contrary to what some people think is my image. Yeah.
Okay. Are you sarcastic or?
No, if I'm sarcastic, I'm not in a good space. Sarcasm is always at somebody else's expense. I can become sarcastic, but that's when I'm feeling defensive and hostile. But irony is something else. Irony is seeing the absurdity behind the image of the world. And irony I love. I love play. So, yeah, it's, people say, you get this good sense of humor. I said, oh yeah, I've known that all my life. I'm one of the funniest guys I know.
This question I was looking forward to ask you. If you could teach every child in the world one lesson only, what would you teach them?
Well, it's not a lesson you can teach like you can teach mathematics. So it's a question of what you mean by teaching. So teaching can happen didactically, formally, as an instruction. And in that sense, I have nothing to teach them. But if you ask me, what would I want them to learn? Is to be themselves. Is to be true to yourself. To be connected to your heart, to your guts, to your body, to your emotions, and not to try to mold yourself into somebody that other people want. So I'd want them to learn to be themselves. But that's not a matter of teaching them mathematics. That's a matter of providing the conditions where they're comfortable being themselves.
It's a very nice answer. If you had the chance to be reborn, would you choose your life again?
I've been asked that question once before.
Oh, really?
I was in this interview called the Proustian interview, where they ask you about everything that you don't know anything about.
Okay.
And the questions come from all over the place, and you never know what the next question is. And they asked me, who would you be if you could be born again? And I said, a drummer. I'd love to do that Arabic drumming or the African drumming or the indigenous drumming. I'd love to be a drummer. That's what I'd be.
Okay. But mine is a bit different.
Okay.
The question is, if you had the chance to be reborn, would you choose the same life again?
No.
No.
Why would somebody want to be a Jewish infant under the Nazis, nearly starved to death, separated from their mother? No, I wouldn't. Would anybody choose that if they had the conscious choice in the matter? And of course, we don't get a choice. Some people think we do. Some people believe that we actually these souls and then we choose. And so I chose this so that I can learn all these things, so I can help heal the world and all this. Forget it. If I had a conscious, no. Would I want to be somebody else? No, I wouldn't. Um, um, but surely, if I was in a shop where they were selling lives, would I choose to be born under those circumstances? Would anybody born to be as an infant in Gaza right now amidst all the starvation? So I would not want to be somebody else. I'm not regretting anything. But would I choose it? I don't think so. Except that if I chose to be somebody else, I wouldn't have the friends that I have. I wouldn't have the experiences that I've had. I wouldn't have the wife and the children that I've had. And no, I wouldn't want not to have that either. So I'll have to leave the answer at that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
And you've used your pain to fuel good. I think, all of us humans go through poisons. And some people get poisoned and they drown in their poison and they give up on life. And some people choose that poison and as a burning fuel for a purpose or a calling, as you called it. And I think you've used it for you, not against you.
Well, I'd like to take credit for that, and to some degree I will. But I think there's something larger there, which is, and this is a realization I came to within the last couple of years, actually, that if you look at my infancy, you can see it as a tragedy, or a potential tragedy, Nazis, Second World War, genocide, Holocaust. My father in forced labor, don't see him till I'm almost a year and a half. My mother able to give me to a stranger. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is all the love that my mother had to give me to a stranger. Can you imagine what it would take for a young woman to give their baby to a stranger in the street? All the love that woman, that Christian woman in the street who didn't know us, took this baby to safety. That's a lot of love there. The relatives who looked after me. In other words, the universe gave me a lot of love. So that it's that love that I think helped me transmute that pain into some kind of wisdom. Some people just had the poison but not much love. And that's where they get stuck.
If someone asked you to describe your relationship with yourself in one word, what would it be?
Curiosity. I'm always looking for the truth of things, including the truth of myself. And not that I always find it, but yeah, I've been really curious about why do I do what I do, and why do I show up the way I show up. And it's always an interesting question.
Do you believe all people are born good?
Well, there's that word good again.
Yeah, shit, I need to...
Yeah. I think all people are born with potential for love and compassion and empathy. That's part of our nature. How that unfolds or gets stuck or blocked depends on what happens to us. So baby is not good or bad. The baby just is.
What is, Gabor, a piece of advice that you've never forgotten?
Well, two. 3 actually. One is my aunt, who was a doctor, and she was a young physician when she was taken to Auschwitz. And my grandparents, her parents, went to the gas chambers, and she was sent the other way. She had a really difficult life. And she saw about me that I wasn't being myself. And she quoted to me that line from Shakespeare about, to thine own self be true, and then it follows as night to day that you can't be false to any man. So just to be myself. I didn't understand it when she was saying it to me, but it turned out to be totally essential. The other two have to do with writing. When I was 19, I entered a writing contest for a newspaper, and I was one of the winners. And the writer who ran the contest sent me a card saying, "You can write." And that changed my life. And then the third had to do with writing as well. I was a medical doctor already. I hadn't written any books yet, which I didn't until I was age 55. But he was a poet, and he was a patient of mine. His name was Warren. He was a very well-known poet in Canada. And I said to him, "Warren, I want to write, but I don't know what." And he says, "Gabor, you will write when you have something to teach the world." That's exactly what happened. So that once I understood some things that I believed, that I saw, that needs to be seen by others, that's when I began to write my books. So those three.
How do you view death?
By the way, laugh. Well, look, I think there's always two different levels here. I mean, intellectually, it's going to happen. And at this age, who knows when it's going to happen? I mean, when I think of 10 years ago, it's the blink of an eye. It's nothing. If I live another 10 years, I'll really be an old person. Not that I'm not old now by some standards, but, so who knows what I got left? And intellectually, I know that. And we just accept it on that level. But do I have fears about it? Yeah. I have fears about giving up life, leaving behind what I love. At the same time, I do see possibilities of leaving peacefully with a sense of, okay, I've been here. I've done what I needed to. It's okay to leave, And I know I'm in a fortunate position. It may seem arrogant on my part to say so, but I think it's objectively also true that the work that I've done and what I've been able to give the world, it'll be around much longer than I will be. So that I will not have wasted the time. Not that I don't waste time. I know how to waste time. But the time I will not have wasted.
This is also another question. Being Canadian Jewish, you said in an interview, I wake up thinking of Gaza and I go to sleep with it.
Yeah.
How come?
Well, given what happened to me and my family, I'm very attuned to suffering in the world. So I've always been like that. So when in school kids were bullied, I would stand up for the kids that were being bullied, against the bullies. So I had a deep sense of justice and truth. And now and then for a while, as you probably know, I used to be a Zionist. I used to believe in this dream of the Jewish resurrection in our ancient homeland and all that stuff. And then when I realized that actually it was a total lie, that actually this dream, so-called, was realized at the cost of a major crime, I was listening today to a podcast with Miko Peled, and Miko is an Israeli whose father was a general in 1967 and so on. And Miko was saying that, and he's an author himself, and he was saying that the creation of Israel was one of the great crimes of the 20th century. And it was, because it demanded for Jews like me. Here's the thing. I could go to Israel tomorrow. I could fly there tomorrow, but the day after I'd be a citizen. When the day after that, I could get special housing in the West Bank, where the Palestinians are not even allowed to build homes on their own lands, where the homes are destroyed. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli army cut down 3,100 olive trees in the West Bank. And this has been going on for 80 years now. So how can I, as a Jew, knowing what happened to my own family, with racial hatred and ethnic superiority did to my own family and my own people, how could I possibly ignore what's now being done in my name? I could go there tomorrow, like I said, a Palestinian born there can't even visit. So it's a deep injustice, not to mention the daily slaughter that we witness on our screens and our TikToks and Instagram. So I'm not exclusively concerned with the Palestinian issue. In Canada, I've been involved in Indigenous people and their trauma, which is huge, by the way. In Canada, an Indigenous woman, they make up 5% of the female population, 77% of the jail population.
Oof.
This is Canada, the true north, strong and free, as we say in our national anthem. So I'm very aware of injustice all over the world. But this one is one of the worst of the past century. And being Jewish is being done in my name. How would I not be concerned with it? And by the way, it's so bad, it's so awful that the millions of people around the world who feel that way, who just, I meet people everywhere who are so upset and their hearts are breaking every day. So I'm not alone in that, but because of my own personal history and having been there, and I was there 3 years ago working with Palestinian women in the West Bank who'd been tortured in Israeli jails. It's awful what goes on over there. So I'm very personally involved with it. And I'm in a somewhat fortunate, if you can call it that, privileged position in that I have somewhat of a platform, so a certain number of people pay attention to what I have to say. And I'm Jewish, so they can't call me an anti-Semite. So it gives me a kind of, so they'll call me a self-hating Jew or a terrorist supporter and all this. You're obviously paid by Qatar, I wish I was. I mean, I'd make a lot of money if Qatar was paying. Why can't Hamas and Qatar pay me something, please? So I'm this kind of nonsense. But at the same time, this platform that I have also gives me a responsibility. And I know, like yesterday, I participated in the webinar for Palestinian therapists in Gaza and in the West Bank. And so I'm in a privileged position that I can actually say something. Now, nothing I've said has saved a single life. Nothing anybody has said has saved a single life. Because that's not how the powers work. But it does make a difference to the Palestinians. That people should witness and understand and empathize with their situation and their aspirations. So that's why.
Before I ask you a random question,
Yeah,
you wrote a book called The Myth of Normal.
yeah,
It's with your son.
yeah.
How come?
Why did I write it with my son?
Mm.
The Myth of Normal is, you might say, is my life project. I've been working on it for 10 years. I'd collected 20,000 articles and research papers, hundreds of books, interviews, and so on. There was so much material there. And it was almost too much for me to do. And at some point, I gave up on it. And I said, I gave the money back to the publisher. I said, I can't do this. But then all of a sudden, it just came back to me and demanded to be written. And when I showed the draft to my son, not the draft of the book, but the proposal, he said, well, look, this needs some cleaning up. And he was so astute and so insightful. And he's such a good writer himself that it just became a no-brainer. So he really helped me organize it, make it more reader-friendly, get my egotism out of the way when it showed up, which it can sometimes. Make it less academic, perhaps. So it was just a partnership that needed to happen.
He said it will be in Arabic too, right?
It's been published in Arabic now, yeah.
Nice. Okay, so this is our card game, which I'll give you. You could take it to New York. I'll give you another new copy, and you can play it with your kids.
Okay.
Do you mind shuffling?
Shuffling, okay.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind. I'm not a good shuffler, but...
You don't need to be.
Okay, is that good enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll choose the first one. And when I ask you, this is similar, wait.
Okay.
Because these are my questions. Okay, this is the question I was going to ask soon. So when I ask you, you throw this, and this is the way of answering.
So the answer is by throwing the dice.
No, it will show you how. I'll show you. So the question is, what are you afraid of? You can throw it.
Throw it on the ground?
Yeah. It says flip. So when it's flipped, it's usually the other person, which is me.
Yeah.
But I think I still want to know your answer, so both of us will answer it.
Okay, I see.
So what are you afraid of?
Nothing at the moment. But because anything that come up with, anything that occurs to me, okay, I'll tell you what I'm not afraid. No, let's just go. Not being seen.
Not being seen.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's being criticized or disagreed with. I don't care, as long as they see who they're disagreeing with, as long as they see who they're criticizing and they understand what I'm saying. Then if they don't agree, no problem. But not being seen. No, that also depends on what day, because on some days I'll say to myself, if somebody doesn't see me, well, if they're blind, they're blind. You know, it's not my problem. But if you, at the core, that's my biggest fear.
And is that the compulsion that you mentioned earlier because of your childhood, or is it just a natural human need?
My friend and the great trauma psychiatrist, Bessel van der Kolk, he says that not being seen is one of the greatest traumas. The child needs to be seen so they can see themselves.
I'll tell you a story that I know that I'm sure you can completely click.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was in solitary confinement. And you know how difficult that is. It's the most antisocial position for a human being to be forced to be alone, right?
Yes.
And he said something that always stuck with me, and I mentioned it a few times. He said, Anas, I had no one to talk to. I was alone. And the only human interaction I would ever have is the person who would slide the food into the box. So the slot was, I think, in the mid-range of the door. So he said, what I would do is once he opens it, I put my eyes just because I want him to acknowledge that I exist. So I want him to see me and I
Yeah.
see him.
Absolutely.
So every day that's what he would do, just wait. So when that opens, he just catches him. And that was the only human interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And solitary confinement has been shown to have all these negative effects on the brain and the person, and they keep using it and using it and using it, sometimes for years. In the United States, people in solitary confinement for years.
I think the UN law is 22 days or 18 days, something like that. That should be the maximum.
Even in Canada, they keep people in months. I'm just reading a Palestinian novel called Tale of a Wall by a prisoner who's still in prison. He's been there for decades, Palestinian prisoner. And the wall becomes his witness. And he starts learning from the wall and speaking with the wall.
Wow. Gabor, who's someone that has passed away and every time you remember them, your heart aches?
Recently, it's been my aunt, Marta, whom I mentioned, because they said she had a very difficult life for a number of reasons. But I was in Auschwitz in May of this year. I was invited by a Polish group to give talks throughout Poland on Palestine. And I said, yeah. And when I was there, they took me to Auschwitz. That was the first time I've ever visited there. It was a profoundly deep visit. And I stood at the railway track where my grandparents and my aunt would have arrived. And they were sent one way, as I said earlier, and she was sent the other way. And somebody gave me a box set of 10 books about Auschwitz, personal accounts. It's just the worst thing in the world. Nothing like it in history. And I thought my aunt went through that. I wish I had asked her more about it. I wish I had shared her experience more. I wish I had given her an opportunity to maybe bring some of that out of herself. She used to have this look on her face. When I read these books on Auschwitz, people describe people with these faraway, almost inhuman look on their faces. I'd see it on her face. It's like when you looked at hell. So I just wish, so she's the one. I wish I had been more in contact with her, more there for her.
And if you could write your aunt, what's her name?
Marta.
Marta. If you can write your aunt Marta a letter today.
Yeah.
And she would read it today.
Yeah.
What would you write?
Oh. I say, you dear person, I really see your suffering. I see your suffering in a way that I could never see when you were alive. And I would thank her for her presence in my life.
When was the last time you cried?
You know when it was? Not long ago. I was watching on Instagram a demonstration in Sweden in support of Gaza. And people were carrying flags and they were carrying pictures of babies. And people in the street would bow to them and people in the street would thank them. And I just wept because of the sheer humanity of those people. So that moved me. So those were tears of just being moved.
Gabor, if I could take your heart and I place it out of your body, what would your heart tell Gabor?
That you're really a sweet person.
Hmm.
Not that everybody would agree, but that's what my heart would say.
If you passed away yesterday, what is the most thing you would have regretted?
What I said before, that when my children were small, I was not the father that I knew I could have been had I known different. That's just a regret. You know, it's not, I'm not guilty. I did my best. That was my best. But that's a regret. That's a regret saying, I wish that could have been different.
You mentioned earlier, Gabor, that a peaceful death.
I should say something else as well.
Of course.
And the same thing would apply to being a husband. That, you know, that I brought so much stress into that relationship that wasn't necessary. That was a product of my own dysfunction. But then again, I couldn't have done any differently. So there's a limit to the extent to which we should dwell on regrets and so on. You know.
You mentioned, Gabor, earlier, peaceful death.
Yeah.
So let's say, God willing, you have a beautiful, healthy life as long as you'd like.
Yeah.
But come the day that you're on your bed and hopefully granted a very peaceful passing.
Actually, I'm not envisioning dying in bed. I love to swim.
Okay.
And I like to swim 2 kilometers or so. So I'd like to die at the very last meter of the two kilometers.
You don't want to drown.
No, I'd get a heart attack.
Okay. But heart attack is painful too. We want it
No,
to
but it could like that.
Okay,
just I'm joking, but okay. But you to finish your question.
That's okay. So the question was, because I've been following what you're saying.
Yeah.
If your passing is a peaceful one.
Yeah.
And you have your kids with you and your wife and any person that's so dear to you, because you mentioned the father you were at a certain stage.
Yeah.
And the husband you were.
Yeah.
And if they're all around you.
Yeah.
In your final moments, what should they hear from Gabor before you go?
Thank you. Just thank you all for coming into my life. The regrets they don't need to hear. They've already heard it. They're sick of it. but the gratitude. Yeah.
How would you like to be remembered?
As someone who's made a difference in people's lives in a positive sense. But I will be remembered that way. I don't have, that way I don't have insecurities, you know? So, yeah.
Final question. Gabor in one word.
Gabor.
No, we need not a name, a representation word of who you are.
Human.
That's too general. Work with me. Okay, I'll make it easier.
I'll work with you on it. We'll get it right.
If we see Gabor walking, and you know Gabor, of course, and he's walking across the street, and I told you, describe him in one word.
True.
True.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.